All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. We're about 18 months away from getting a look at the new Southeastern Conference when Texas and Oklahoma will become official members. Now, the addition of Texas and Oklahoma will mean that the SEC would then have 16 members. And of course, the SEC will join the Big Ten as the two mega conferences of the sport. Of course, the Big Ten is anticipating USC and UCLA joining at the same time that Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC. Now, oh, what a difference that 32 years has made for the SEC as they went from being a 10-team conference with an 8-game conference schedule to being a 12-team conference in 1992 with the additions of Arkansas and South Carolina, which allowed them to be the first college football conference to have a conference title game, which has become the granddaddy of all conference championship games. And of course, it was a decade ago, about a decade ago, when both Texas A&M and Missouri joined the SEC to make it a 14-team conference. But even with all of that, the SEC was able to maintain some semblance of order, even though that they were operating on an outdated 8-game conference schedule that would only see some schools meet in some cases every 5 years. However, the SEC is expected to go to a 9-game conference schedule when Texas and Oklahoma join the toughest football conference in the nation. But you can also bid farewell to some tradition in that conference as well. There's a pretty good chance that the expanded SEC will mean adios to the East and West divisions, as each school would then have three fixed opponents with six rotating opponents that will appear on the team schedule every other year. When it was first announced that Texas and Oklahoma would be joining the SEC, I felt that the conference could have kept the East West format hypothetically if they had moved Auburn to the SEC East. But instead, the conference could be going with the more popular format where it's just a free for all to win the conference. Now, conferences like the Pac 12 and ACC have done away with the divisional format in recent years in their leagues in order to give them more of an opportunity to compete with the SEC in order to get to the college football playoff. But the SEC didn't necessarily need to do it. Now, this will definitely change things going forward, as there are some people who feel that Georgia has benefited in recent years from playing in the SEC East as opposed to having to be in the West where they'd have to face the likes of Alabama and LSU each year, along with Auburn, who they already face every year between the hedges. Now, Alabama football head football coach Nick Saban is not a fan of the fixed opponents, as his Crimson Tide would be locked in to face Tennessee, LSU, and Auburn every year. And I mean, look at it. Tennessee and Auburn have been longtime rivals of Alabama, with the third Saturday in October and the Iron Bowl being two of the backbone rivalries of the history of the SEC. And as Alabama, you go back to last season, they were looking to win a national title. They had a championship worthy team, but they were denied by a pair of walk-off losses on the road to Tennessee and LSU, respectively. And these are the only two blemishes on the Tide's record last year. But like Saban, I am interested to see how the fixed opponent format is going to work in the SEC. Now, I would expect some rivalries to stay in place. I would still expect Georgia and Florida to play, whether that's in Gainesville and Athens or they keep the game in Jacksonville. I'd still expect Florida and Tennessee to face each other as well, because you think about that contest, especially in the 1990s, how important that game was to the fabric of the SEC, along with, for most parts, deciding who was going to get to Atlanta for the conference championship game. Mississippi and Mississippi State, that's the Egg Bowl. You're not going to touch that. Vanderbilt and Tennessee. That's an in-state rivalry. Flies under the radar for the most part, being that Vandy has not been as consistent on the gridiron as Tennessee, but nonetheless, it's still an important game to the folks in that region. Texas A&M meeting Arkansas. This was a big contest in the old Southwest Conference. It's once again a big contest here in the SEC as both of these two teams meet in Arlington every single year, as these rivalries were part of the old and new fabric of this conference. And when Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC next year, you can expect Texas and Texas A&M to once again be reunited on the gridiron after the rivalry was put on pause when the Aggies left the Big 12 nearly a decade ago. And anybody who follows the great sport that is college football knows how important the rivalry between Texas and Texas A&M has been over the years. Now, speaking of Texas, would they also have to have a yearly battle with Arkansas? And you think about it, I talked about the rivalry between Texas and Texas A&M, but that Texas Arkansas rivalry goes back to the days when both of these teams were in the now defunct Southwest Conference. Would that rivalry be renewed? I do believe so. And like Alabama, Texas could have three fierce fixed games when it's all said and done, as they could possibly face A&M, Arkansas, and you know they're going to face Oklahoma every single year at the Cotton Bowl. Georgia will more than likely get Florida and Auburn as two of their three fixed opponents. But would Tennessee be the other? And you think back to the late 90s and early 2000s, excuse me, especially in the SEC East, that Georgia Tennessee game was a fierce battle. We saw it mean something again this past season with the resurgence of Tennessee. And I'm not sure if the powers that be in that conference want to see that game go away. Now, I can also see a scenario for LSU where they're probably going to face Alabama every year, but I could also see them play facing Arkansas, a trophy game, as well as Texas A&M, as that is another big game. And that right there, those three games won't be a walk in the park. And the same could be said for A&M, as they're more than likely going to have to face Arkansas, LSU, and Texas. Now, at the end of the day, there's not going to be a place to hide in the SEC because there's not, I mean, there already aren't that many off days in the conference, but there really aren't going to be off days in the conference if this format sticks. For me, it's you say that because you think about the networks that are involved in covering this conference. That's number one. But number two, you think about what's coming down the pike and, with the expanded college football playoff. So losing one or two of these games in this tough conference is not going to be the end of the road for these teams because right off the bat, I see the SEC getting at least three of those 12 positions in the 12 team format. So at the end of the day, you know what? You might as well play everybody right now and see who's who and what's what. Will this new conference format hurt or hinder the SEC? I think it's going to help. I really do, because it's still going to be a battle to get to the conference championship game. It's still going to be a battle to get to Atlanta, yes. But at the end of the day, just like I said, there is no place to run and there is no place to hide in this conference. And of course, being that the SEC is not the only conference going to a 16-team format, will the Big Ten follow suit with a format similar to this? And there's a good possibility that we're going to see this in the Big Ten as well. I think the SEC, in my opinion, has better footing with this as opposed to the Big Ten because the Big Ten region wise is going to be completely out of whack because you're dealing with a coast to coast conference when you factor in Rutgers, of course, and then, of course, UCLA and USC joining next year. The SEC can get away with this a little bit more because technically Texas and Oklahoma are still somewhat in that region. And now, you've have a bevy of schools that used to play each other in the Big 12 that are in the SEC: Texas, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Missouri. And then, of course, you think about Arkansas, Texas A&M, and Texas all being in the Southwest Conference once upon a time. So it's still, in that same region. So you can get away with it. But from a Big Ten standpoint, I really thought that when USC and UCLA decided to join the conference, it would just be like, okay, you know what? Put them in the Big Ten West, shift, an Illinois or a Purdue over to the Big Ten East because it kind of would cut down on some of the traveling aspect. You would still have USC and UCLA playing the Western schools of the Big Ten more. But if they go to a 3-3-6 format, which is to be expected, it's going to be a whirlwind because you think about it, the Big Ten, in my opinion, has more rivalry games that are probably going to be at stake as far as falling by the wayside than the SEC. But at the end of the day, that's what it has come down to. That's what it's all about in these mega conferences. Some old rivalries and old traditions are going to be pushed aside in favor of new ones. And then, of course, we haven't even talked about the elephant in the room, further conference expansion. We have the likes of Florida State and Clemson not being thrilled with the payout gap between the ACC and the SEC. The same thing could be said for possibly Oregon and Washington leaving the Pac 12 if the Pac 12 is unable to secure a television deal in the near future that keeps everybody that is still remaining in that conference happy. So we have to wait and see. But nonetheless, this is going to be a new day in college football, the ever expanding conferences. And I don't think that, we're going to stop at 16. Like I've said before, and I've even said it recently, it would not surprise me within the next 10 years that we're going to be talking about some of these conferences having at least 20 members. That's just the nature of the beast. Everybody is chasing the money. And when it's all said and done, it's making it more difficult to try to squeeze everybody in to a 12 game regular season schedule when it's just about nine conference games. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I am signing off, saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.